As we think about supplementation programs in a cow-calf enterprise, oftentimes producers' primary concern is going to be with what type of supplement should I be feeding. Should I feed cubes or cake or liquid or tubs, or should I be feeding hay? And those are all important decisions, but truthfully the success or failure of any supplementation program depends primarily upon the quantity and quality of the forage that's being supplemented. Whether that forage is rooted out there in the pasture as standing forage, or as oftentimes the case, especially in the eastern part of Texas and pretty much across the southern U.S., hay is going to be a big part of that program in the fall, winter, and maybe even into the early spring. So how can a cattleman know if there's enough forage out there in the pasture for those cows to get full every day? And probably one of the more practical ways is to observe the grazing behavior of those cows. If cows would have their way, they'll typically have two major grazing events, depending on weather and humidity and day length and those type things. But they'll typically have a significant event in the morning, a grazing event in the morning. Midday, if those cows are full, you ought to find them in the shade somewhere, oftentimes maybe close to the water, where they'll be ruminating or chewing their cud, processing, if you will, and further digesting the forage that they harvested that morning. And then typically, again, depending on the weather and environmental conditions, maybe late afternoon, early evening, they'll have another significant grazing event. So an interpretation might be, if you see cattle out there in the middle of the day hustling, and grazing, trying to fill up, maybe that's an indicator that those cattle are a little bit short on forage availability and are not able to get their fill on a daily basis. And then you can also read things like their fill. You know, if you look at a cow from her left side, that area behind her ribs and in front of her hip is a good place to get an indication of rumen fill. If she's really sunken in there, kind of drawn, that's maybe an indicator that she's not getting full every day on forage. So again, grazing behavior is a great way to tell whether or not those cows are getting enough to eat, and forage availability as well as quality is a huge determinant in the success or failure of your supplementation program. Another important indicator in terms of the nutritional status in a cow-calf operation is body condition score of those cattle, of the cows especially. And so maybe that's a little bit longer term measure, but certainly as we evaluate body condition, that's an excellent indicator as to the nutritional status of that cow. Maybe oftentimes difficult if we see those cows on a daily basis for us to determine significant changes in body condition. So that's where somebody, when the kids come home for the weekend, maybe a spouse can go out there with you intermittently and look at those. It can oftentimes be a valuable appraisal of changes in body condition. If you're interested in learning more about body condition and haven't picked it up on this channel, if you go back to the main menu for this channel, we've got some video clip there wherein Dr. Gill and myself describe the body condition scoring system with video of cows describing that body condition scoring system. It's a 1 to 9 system, 1 being extremely thin, 9 being extremely obese. Well, we've talked about grazing behavior and using the grazing behavior of your cattle to know whether or not there's enough forage out there for them to fill up on a daily basis. The other thing that's always of interest, and we get a lot of questions from producers, is, well, what's the quality of the forage that I have out there? And oftentimes the observation's made, well, I got a lot of stuff growing out there, standing out there in the pasture. Is it good forage? Well, certainly this year is no exception. We've had a pretty good weed crop. And as we think about forage that's available and preferable to cattle, oftentimes the weeds, especially as they get bigger and more mature, are not palatable. And so while they may look like there's something to eat, in a cow's mind, that's really not something to eat. The other thing that we know is, as forages, especially grasses, as they get more mature, they go down in quality. Fiber content goes up, and that tends to dilute then the protein and energy content of those forages. And it's unfortunate, but the poorer the quality, the less a cow can eat. And the higher the quality, the more vegetative it is, the more a cow can eat. And so it'd be nice if the poorer the quality, the more they could eat, but it just doesn't work that way. The more fibrous it is, the slower it's digested in the rumen, and it's kind of like putting water in a hose. How much is coming out one end is a function of how much can go in the opposite end. And so as forages get more mature, they begin to put on a seed head. As we think about our warm season perennial forages, that's typically late summer or fall. But as they put on that seed head, as coastal Bermuda grass gets mature, the quality goes down, the fiber content goes up, and so the more the cattle need to eat. That can really come into play, especially on young cattle that can't handle, they can't consume a significant amount of that fiber. So the limitation on forage intake actually limits the performance of those younger cattle.